This morning, I'm not sure what the weather is like where, all of you are this young, but over here where I'm at, it's raining. And really it's been raining off and on all week. But as I was preparing this morning and I looked outside at the rain, and as I normally do, I got lost in my thoughts. It reminded me of a passage. And that passage is Joshua 3:14 through 15. It says, "And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Yarden, and the priests buried the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they bare the ark were come unto the Yarden, and the feet of the priests that bare the ark were dipped in the brim of the water. For Yarden overfloweth all his banks all the time of the harvest." Now here, Yasharel is completing an arduous 40 years in the wilderness. Tough times, to be honest. And they are finally drawing near and entering the land promised. Now here in the text where it says, his banks overfloweth all the times of the harvest, that's another way of saying that his banks overflow around the time of the harvest. And if this is around the time of the harvest, this tells me that a seed has been planted. Yahudah has saw fit to water that seed, hence the banks overflowing, and the time of life, or renewed life, the time of harvest, is near. Now, for our ancestors, there were several rainy seasons and several times of harvest, and they all are appointed their times by Yahudah and his favor. But I was reminded this morning that this rain that I am experiencing, it's a sign that the time of renewal and life and green ears is drawing nigh. And it is at that time of renewal that Yahudah calls his flock, if you would, to his appointed feast, Pesach. "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me," Yahusha said. Now Yahudah, because he loves his people, not wishing that any should perish, he saw fit to give us instructions throughout Scripture to be prepared, to make preparations, and gather together unto him at the feast. The fact that it is called his feast is an indication that it is an obligation. In fact, Scripture tells us that those who do not come as they are instructed shall be cut off from the people of Yah. Now, this is not to pass guilt or judgment on anyone, because when I thought of this morning, I was thinking and I was reminding myself of the importance of the feast and the signs that Yahudah gives us. And I realized that the preparations that we do in lieu of attending the feast is actually, one, showing our obedience to Yah and his commandments, but two, it also shows that we are making the necessary preparations for things to come. Think about it. If we are not prepared for the feast, in which we have clear signs, instructions, and ample time for preparations, how much less are we prepared for the time appointed when the master returns as a thief in the night? Now, this isn't my lesson today, but just something that I thought of and reminded myself about being prepared and always, staying in the word and make sure my walk is continuing in Yahudah when I think about these things. But for today, what I have is a message from Yahudah. And most of us that have been in this walk for a while, we can deduce that most likely the name that we see here as Jude is more than likely Yahudah in Hebrew. Because the Bible has been preserved and presented to us in English, what we have here is an anglicized shortening of Judah to Jude. Now, there are several Judes, Judahs, and Judas, all which are derivatives of Yahudah mentioned in the Brit Hadashah, or what you would call the New or Renewed Covenant or the New or Renewed Testament. You have Judas Iscariot. You have Jude the Apostle. You have Judas Barsabbas, Judas the Galilean, Judas the owner of the house in Damascus where Ananias is sent to find Rabbi Shaul. And you also have Jude, the brother of Yahusha, which, to highlight the point that all of these names come from Yahudah, we can read Mark 6, verse 3, and it says, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Miriam, or Mary, the brother of James and Joseph, and of Judah and Shimon, and are not his sisters here with us?" Now, Jude here is being preserved as Judah, brother of Yahusha. And also in the book of Matthew, chapter 13, verse 55, it says, "Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Miriam, and his brethren, James and Joseph and Shimon and Judas?" So here we see it is preserved as Judas, the brother of Yahusha. So, who is the author of the book of Jude? Now, religious scholars, they are divided on this topic, on this point. Some say it is Jude, the brother of Yahusha. Some say it is Jude, the apostle, while others contend that they are both one and the same. Let us look at verse 1. And in verse 1, it says, "Jude, the servant of Yahusha HaMashiach, and brother of James, to them that are sanctified by Elohim the Father, and preserved in Yahusha HaMashiach, and called." Now, verse 1, it tells us that Jude is a servant of Yahusha HaMashiach and brother of James. And that's where we come into another issue, as James is not a Hebrew name. Now, most people will tell you that the name James was inserted and added as a tribute to King James with his version of the Bible. And that would be inaccurate. The truth of the matter is that the name given to us in English as James was originally Yaakov, or Jacob in English. It was translated into Greek as Jakobos, as you see here, or Jakobos. And this was done when the Bible was first translated to English in 1382 by John Wycliffe. He was a Catholic priest from England, and he translated or changed Jakobos, as you see here, to James in English. By the time you get to King James and his Bible version, the name had already stuck, and it just became solidified by his authorization. So just know that whenever you see James in the New Testament, the true Hebrew name there is Yaakov. Now, authorship of the epistle being attributed to Jude the apostle, and to him and Jude the brother of Yahusha being reckoned as the same person, that's a little bit more challenging. In the two passages that we looked at a few minutes ago, Mark 6:3, and Matthew 13:55, we can clearly see that Yahudah is Yahusha's brother. And the Greek word for brother here is adelphos. All right. And if we look into the interlinear, which is another way to study the Bible, another version of the Bible, we can see that it also says adelphos here. All right. And we can do the same thing if we go to Matthew 13:55. Here also we see the same word adelphos as adelphi, which is a derivative of adelphos, here into interlinear as well. But while we're here, what I want you to do is I want you to take note in this interlinear where it says carpenter's son. And we can see here that the word for son is wheels. All right. Now, the confusion around identifying both Jude's mention, or both of them being mentioned as indeed the same, it's based around verses in both the book of Luke and the book of Acts, which I will have you note that both of these books, they're written by the same person, which is Luke. Now, if we look at Luke 6, there is a few verses here that list all of the disciples. If we look at verse 16, it says that Judas or Yahudah is the brother of Jacob or James. Now, here we can note that Judas is being listed here as an apostle. But the problem is this portion where it says the brother of James, it's grayed out. And that indicates to us that it has been added here for clarity, but it wasn't in the original text. We can find the same issue if we look at Acts 1, verse 13. And here again, where it says Judas, the brother of James, it is also grayed out as well. Now, some of the newer biblical translations, they will translate this passage as Judas, son of James. And to further complicate the matter, even in the interlinear, we can see that they also translate it as Judas, son of James. So, what gives? If we look at the Greek here, there are two things that we do not see. We do not see huios, indicating son, nor do we see adelphos, indicating brother. So the literal reading of the Greek here says Judas, James, or Judas and James, with no indicator of brother or son. Now, the problem here, it could be several things. And I think most prominently, the changing of the names, it plays a major factor when it gets translated to Greek. The rendering of Yahudah in Greek is Yahudis. All right. And the name here in Greek, it ends with a sigma, which could be mistaken as a suffix ending for huios, which means son, when in reality, this is just a normal spelling in the Greek for Judas or Yahudis. In a nutshell, something is either missing or intentionally omitted from the text here. So for us, there is nothing that we can do to rectify that. So we have to rely on the evidence that we have. Both Mark 6, which we read, and Matthew 13 told us that James or Yaakov and Yahudah or Jude or Judah are brothers of Yahusha. It also identifies Yahudah or Jude as being an apostle. In addition, in Galatians 1:19, Rabbi Shaul calls Yaakov an apostle and the master's brother. So if we take all of this information and we go back to Jude 1, Jude says he is the brother of Yaakov. And indeed, in the Greek and the interlinear, brother is present because we can see adelphos here. The conclusion, Jude the apostle and the author of Jude are indeed the same person who is the brother of Yahusha. Now also, if we look at the Strongs for Jude, we can see all of the information that I have just presented to you. We can see Yahudah is the original name or the origin name. We can see Judas or Judas is a derivative of it. And we can see Jude is a derivative of it also. All right. And if we look at that entry number 5, we can see that Jude is indeed the brother of Yaakov, brother of Yahusha, and author of this epistle. But why does it say he's the half-brother of Yahusha? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to just have to hold on to that information just for a minute. Because what I want to do is I want to talk about Joseph and Mary for a second. And I believe that for most of us, the story that we have been told concerning the betrothal and the marriage of Joseph and Mary is that Joseph was older than Mary when she was betrothed to him. In some instances, we have been told that Joseph was significantly older than Mary. I've even heard some say that Mary's parents were not well off, and that her betrothal to Joseph was done in an effort to receive her dowry price, which would in turn be used for the benefit of the family, to pay for Roman taxes and such. Some say that Joseph was a widow and that Yahusha's brothers and sisters were a product of his previous marriage. But why do we believe, or why do we even entertain these things? The mentioning in the Strong of Jude or Yahudah being the half-brother of Yahusha, it is true in its technical sense. Yahusha was conceived of the Ruach HaKodesh. We can find that out in Matthew 1. Whereas Jude or Yahudah, he would have been fathered by Joseph. But to the general public, this was not known. To them, Yahusha and Yahudah, well, they were just simply seen as brothers. In the passage in Mark 6 that we looked at earlier, it says, is this not the carpenter? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Miriam, the brother of James and Joseph, and of Yahudah and Shimon, and are not his sisters here with us? This is clearly indicating that they see them as just brothers and sisters. Now, here, Yahusha is pretty much in his own country, and he's at a synagogue where seemingly he regularly attends, and the people ask him this. So that's another indication that even the people in the synagogue, they saw him and saw them as just brothers and sisters. Now, further on in Matthew 1:18. Mary is espoused or betrothed to Joseph and was found to be with child of the Ruach HaKodesh. In verse 19, we find out that Joseph is a just man, meaning he is a Torah keeper. He's upright in his ways. He is not willing to make Miriam or Mary a public example. So he put her away privily, which means privately. And Joseph not willing to make Mary a public example, it means that the matter of her conception, it was kept privately, saving her from what would have undoubtedly been death by stoning. Now, Joseph, again, being an upright man and being given confirmation of the event of Mary's conception, honors the betrothal contract by taking Mary to him as a wife. And in verse 25, it reads, and knew her not till she had brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Yahudah. Now, question, does this verse indicate that he never knew her? No. The tradition that Joseph fathered children prior to Mary, it's made its way into our doctrine and Christian doctrine by the way of the Catholic Church. It is needed by the church to enhance the stance of Mary's virginity, not only in conception, but by their traditions, a perpetual state of virginity, meaning that they believe she remained a virgin for the rest of her life. The Catholic Church makes use of the lack of Joseph being mentioned outside of Messiah's birth to assume that he died or that he went away shortly thereafter. In this case, when the text mentions Yahudah having brothers, the Catholic Church purports that these had to have been from a previous marriage, thus preserving what they infer as Mary's perpetual virginity. But Matthew 1:25 kills that argument, as the text here implies that Joseph knew Mary after Yahudah was born. Let's hop back over to Jude. Again, entry number 5 of the Strong's definition for Jude also kills the Catholic Church's stance of Mary's perpetual virginity. As for a sibling, to be considered a half-sibling means that they share or have a blood relation to one of their parents. We already know that Yahudah was fathered by the Ruach HaKodesh, meaning that there is only one parent he could share with his siblings, their mother, Miriam, and in turn tells us that Miriam did not remain a virgin. Now, the reason I have laid all of this out for you is because it speaks to an underlying tone and theme that we find in this epistle of Jude or Yahudah. Prior to Messiah's birth, and even continuing on through the epistles we get from Shaul and others, the belief and or faith of the Yahudim had become inundated with traditions of men and various extra-biblical writings, neither of which have any basis in the submission to and application of the following of the way, the truth, and the light. Titus 1:13 says, this witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. And this is referring to the Cretans or the Greeks, in which there were Yahudim mixed among them, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments or tradition of men that turn from the truth. This is telling you that these Jewish fables, commandments of men, or traditions of men, they can turn you from the truth. Unto the pure, all things are pure. But unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. But even their mind, the defiled and unbelieving, and conscious, it is defiled. They profess that they know Elohim, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient. And to every good work, reprobate. That word reprobate, that means rejected, worthless, or like we were talking about with the Pesach, those that have been cut off. Family, there is only one truth, and that truth is the Bible. Let's get into it, and I'm going to read Jude, verses 1 through 3. It says, Jude, the servant of Yahushua HaMashiach and brother of James, or Yaakov, to them that are sanctified by Elohim the Father and preserved in Yahushua HaMashiach and called, mercy unto you, and peace and love be multiplied. Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that ye should earnestly contend for the faith, which was once delivered unto the saints. Now, the first thing to note with Yahudah is that this epistle is being addressed to a specific group of people. The text says that this is to them that are sanctified. In Hebrew, this is Kadash, or those who have been made or proclaimed clean. They also are preserved in Yahushua HaMashiach. This is not Saul, which means to snatch away, but the action is to be delivered. And called, which is kara, meaning to call out, or call by name, or to call or send forth for action to proclaim. In essence, they that are called are akin to the apostles or the Kodashim, the ones who were set apart and sent forth to do the work of apostleship. This is who this epistle is addressed to. He continues by greeting them with Hesed, Shalom, and Ahava Rabbah, mercy, peace, and love multiplied. Now, Hesed is interesting here because it means kindness, favor, but it also means piety or to be pious. When it is used in a greeting, it is used to insinuate and to reciprocate that favor or kindness towards each other that has been given to them or given to us from Elohim. But it is also used to implore that the recipient remain pious and with piety toward Elohim. In essence, keep the faith, keep running the race. Let's look at Matthew 22, verse 14. It says, for many are called, but few are chosen. And you all who have been fellowshipping with Goshen group should be familiar with this verse. This one has been put forth several times, and it shows that there is a level beyond being called, which is to be chosen. Now, chosen in Hebrew, it is bakar or bahar, and it means to select or the selected. But properly, it means to try, which tells us that those that are chosen or those that are called and chosen are those who are tried. Let's look at Revelations 2. And here the prophet Yehukanan is writing unto the messenger of the assembly in Ephesus, and he says, I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil, and thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars. So here you have ones who have been called, chosen, tried, and have been found evil or liars. But there is yet and still an additional and a final level beyond being chosen, and which we also should all recognize. It is in Revelation 17, verse 14. It says, "These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is master of masters and King of kings. And they that are with him are called, chosen, and faithful." So who we see here are the selected, the ones who have been sent forth, the apostles, and they've been tried, and we know that because they are called, chosen, and have been found faithful. Deuteronomy 7:9, it says, "Know therefore that Yahudah thy Elohim, he is Elohim, the faithful Elohim, which keepeth covenant and hesed or mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repayeth them that hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack to him that hateth him, he will repay him to his face. Thou shalt therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command thee this day to do them." Now, keep or watch is shamar. It means to guard. It means to stay with, to pay attention, to do the commandments. Let's look at Matthew 24:42. It says, "Watch," again, shamar, guard, do. "Therefore, for ye know not what hour your master doth come. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would have not suffered his house to be broken up." Now, for a second here, good man, it is the head of the family. It is the father. It is the chief. And remember, I said watch means to guard, to do. And here, Yahusha is saying that if this master of the house, this father of the house would have watched, guarded, was doing, then his house wouldn't be suffered to be broken up. It's important. "Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh. Who then is faithful and wise servant, whom his master have made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. And if that evil servant shall say in his heart, My master delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the master of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and he shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The point and the purpose of these set of verses can actually be summed up in its subtitle. We ought to watch like good servants, expecting every moment our master's coming. Again, that means guard. That means to do. This is why Jude implores them in verse 3 that they should earnestly contend for the faith. It is not easy. Earnestly here, it means to struggle for. And earnestly by itself, it means to not take casually, lightly, or flippantly. We should give all we have to Yahuwah and the faith we have in his word and our Savior, Yahushua HaMashiach, at all times. Let's read verses 4 and 5. It says, "For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, unrighteous men turning the favor of our Elohim into lasciviousness, and denying the only master Elohim and our master Yahushua HaMashiach. I will therefore put you in remembrance, though ye once knew this, how that the master, having saved the people out of the land of Mitzrayim, afterward destroyed them that believed not." Now, Yahudah or Jude here is bringing to the awareness the plight of their and our fathers. He is using what happened during the Exodus in Mitzrayim to highlight this point. And if you have been following me on the 6-day study, you are familiar with this account. Yahuwah saved the people out of Mitzrayim only to have to destroy 3,000 of them at Mount Sinai, amongst other occasions that we'll get to in the future. Their actions showed that they denied the power of Yahuwah. They became unrighteous in their actions, taking for granted the favor and kindness Yahuwah showed to them. They not only prostituted themselves to and before the golden calf, but their behavior led them to give into their lasciviousness, which basically means sexual desire. Remember, Aharon had made them naked. And it all began because Aharon, who was to be shamaring or standing watch, guarding, keeping the word of Yahuwah, doing, he allowed certain men to creep in and strong-arm him into fashioning a golden calf. Side note, I couldn't help but to think when I saw this passage that the serpent, it also crept into the garden unbeknownst to Adam. And I thought to myself, how could this happen? And what I realize is that men are simple beings. Sorry, Akeem. But women, sometimes they can be a little bit more complicated. If you think about it, Eve's sole purpose for eating of the tree was to gain wisdom. Sure, she was beguiled by the serpent, but she admits it much to Elohim. The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. But Adam, when he was questioned, the first thing he says is, I was naked. And this woman, the woman you gave me, she gave me something to eat. It's not by accident that many of our forefathers continually fell victim because of sexual desire and things eaten and being done by other nations. Akeem, we are not exempt. We must learn to turn off and kill the things that seemed natural and pleasing to the old man and remain steadfast in our obedience to Elohim, denying at those times what naturally seems pleasing to the flesh and hold fast to those things necessary to make it into the kingdom. Shamar, keep watch, guard our houses so they're not broken up or destroyed. And we do that by guarding Yahuwah's instructions and doing them. Let's continue on with verses 6 through 9. It says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto judgment of the great day, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth as for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Likewise, also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignities. Yet Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moshe, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, Yahuwah rebuked thee." Now, in these set of verses, the first thing we need to remind ourselves of is the fact that Jude or Yahudah is still drawing contrasts and illustrating the plight of those certain men who crept in unawares and them being destroyed. In verse 8, he calls them filthy dreamers who defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignities. The first illustration that he makes is with the angels, which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. The immediate thought one will have is that Yahudah is drawing this reference from the book of Enoch. And that may or may not be true. Without going too far in depth, I would say that just because an author uses another writing or work to illustrate a point does not mean that he is endorsing that writing or work to be 100% accurate or 100% truth. Paul commonly uses Greek poems in his writings as well. A lot of these works, they fall into the category of pseudepigraphia, which means falsely attributed. These are works like Enoch, Jubilees, Jasher, etc. In other circles, they are known as what is called in Hebrew Agadah or Haggadah, which in Hebrew, I'll have you note, means a fairy tale, tale, or a lore. Now, it does not mean that there are not some truths in them that can be validated by the Bible, but it does mean that you need to be very careful that you mix not the profane that can sometimes be found in them with the truth, lest you become defiled in your understanding. Remember Titus 1:14, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. These works that I have mentioned, as well as many others, they had been in circulation for hundreds of years by the time Yahudah writes this. And in many instances, they had become a part of doctrine for a great majority of the people. Most of what he is mentioning here can be found in the Bible itself. Angels being bound, until the time of judgment. Well, we see that in Revelations 9:14-15. It says, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loose, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay a third part of man. Perhaps the timing of the event that Yahudah was writing about, maybe that can be found in 1 Peter 3:18. It says, for Mashiach also have once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to Elohim, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Ruach, by which also he went and preached unto the Ruachs in prison, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of Elohim waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. Now, I'll have you note that this preaching to the Ruachs in prison is indeed preaching to Ruachs. And we can know this because he differentiates, Kepha in his writings, between Ruachs being one thing and, as he refers to Noah, souls being a certain other thing like Noah. And Peter, he also mentions this same event in 2 Peter 2, 4 through 5. It says, "For if Elohim spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down into hell or Sheol, and delivered them into the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the unrighteous." Hallelujah. So that's possibly where we get this mention. But in verse 6, the wording for first estate here, it is correct, but it's extremely vague. You see, the word used here for estate or first estate is archi. And normally this is verbalized as archon or archon. It is a Greek word that is used to describe the position of the chief angels. And that little red number 1 you see next to it, that is telling us that this word is related to principalities like you would see in Ephesians 1:21, where it says, "Far above all principality and power and might and dominion and every name that is named, not only in this world, but also in that which is to come." So the literal wording in Jude 6 is the angels which kept not their position. They abandoned their duties, much like Yasharel did at Mount Sinai. And if we continue on, verse 7 would be what would be used by many to validate their position about what they believe about the angels that kept not their first estate, mentioned in verse 6 as it pertains to verse 6. The mentioning of the fornication and the strange flesh, it could cause one to believe that the angels that are leaving their first estate was when the book of Enoch says that they took women unto them from whom they chose. But for one, the Bible never says that angels slept with women. Number 2, the points they would need in verse 7 to validate their stance is not referring to the angels at all. Let's read verse 7 again slower, and you will see. It says, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to the fornication." This is Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them. They are the ones going after strange flesh. And this whole event is set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. And what this is referring to, this illustration that Jude is painting, is that Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities about them, they gave themselves over to strange flesh. And because of it, they suffered the vengeance of eternal fire. And that's what the angels who kept not their first estate are going to suffer at the judgment of that great day, which in turn is also referring to the men who crept in unawares. Lastly, the mentioning of Michael and the devil disputing over the body of Moshe is not found in the scriptures at all either. But an event similar to it can be found in Zechariah 3, verses 1 and 2. It says, "And he shewed me Yahushua the high priest standing before the messenger of Yahudah, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. And Yahudah said unto Satan, Yahudah rebuked thee. O Satan, even Yahudah that have chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? Now, the philosopher and theologian Origen, who lived in the 1st and 2nd century, as well as Gelasius, not to be confused with the melanated Pope Gelasius, that's a nugget for someone, as well as many others, they report that the event that Jude or Yahudah is referencing, it was found in a pseudepigraphical work entitled The Assumption of Moses. As I mentioned previously, works like these, they had been around for hundreds of years by this time. The portion in the Assumption of Moses that contained this passage about Michael and Satan disputing over the body, it has never been found, but its existence is attested to by Origen, by Gelasius, and by many, many, many others. And it is more than likely that the author of the Assumption of Moses used the information available in Zechariah and expounded on it, attributing the angel before Yahudah as Michael and changing the high priest Yahushua to Moshe. In any sense, the statement that Jude put forth, it's not super far from the truth. The adversary, he contends, opposes, and accuses anyone that Yahudah has called and chosen and needs to be tried. That would be Moshe, Yahusha, as we saw in Zechariah, you, me, or anyone sent forth or set forth to do the work of the kingdom. Let's continue reading verses 10 through 19. It says, but these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally is beasts, and those things they corrupt themselves. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Korah. These are spots in your feast of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. Raging waves of the sea, foaming out their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Master cometh with 10,000 of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are unrighteous among them of all their unrighteous deeds which they have unrighteously committed, and all their hard speeches which unrighteous sinners have spoken against him. These are murmurers, complainers, walking after their own lusts, and their mouth speaketh great swelling words, having men's persons in admiration because of advantage. But, beloved, remember ye the words which were spoken before of the apostles of our Master Yahushua HaMashiach, how that they told you there shall be mockers in the last time, who shall walk after their own unrighteous lusts. These be they who separate themselves, sensual, having not the Spirit or the Ruach. Yahudah says a lot here, and most of it is self-explanatory as he continues his condemnations against those men who have crept in unawares. He compares them to Cain, who, although he knew what was expected of him, stubbornly disobeyed the way of Yahudah to the point where he ends up murdering his brother. And also Balaam, who took pleasure in unrighteousness and immorality and prophesying the likes for reward and gain, as well as Korah, who spoke evil against Aharon and Moshe and attempted to lead a rebellion against them for his own gain. Yahudah says that these types of men who to their own destruction follow the ways of Cain, the ways of Balaam, and the ways of Korah, these are present at our feast. Before I go into that angle, allow me to bring out the fact that in verses 14 and 15, Yahudah again uses what may appear to be the book of Enoch to illustrate a point of the impending end of these type of men. A nugget for you, if you did not know. This epistle by Yahudah, it's a mirror image of the epistle of 2 Peter. More specifically, 2 Peter 2. So much so that in both epistles, both Kepha or Peter and Jude seem to be using the same extra biblical sources to illustrate their points. Those points being virtually identical. Men who have crept in unawares. I find this to be very, very telling. Could it be that either Kepha or Yahudah used the other's epistle to illustrate these points, following the same pattern and the same concerns? This would not be unheard of, as we know that the Besorah or the Gospels came about this way. Now, history and biblical scholars, they tell us that Kepha's epistle was written first, sometime around 60 AD, and that Yahudah's epistle was written somewhere between 67 to 80 AD. So here's what I think. I believe that the epistles are very close to being identical because Yahudah and Kepha or Yahudah used the same pattern and mode that Kepha used. So yes, I believe that Yahudah drew his inspiration and his pattern from Kepha's epistle. But I also believe that this was done because they were both dealing with an identical audience. You see, Kepha was the head of the assembly in Jerusalem, along with Jacob or James. Peter was martyred in Rome in 64 AD. And it is plausible that Yahudah may have replaced him as one of the heads in the assembly of Jerusalem, thus giving him authority in an assembly that was still dealing with the same issues that Kepha was illustrating. But why use what appears to be these extra biblical sources to illustrate these points? To me, it is simple. It is a term that we used while we were all in church. And that is, sometimes you have to meet people where they are at. I remember coming into this truth and meeting many elders in this walk. Most prominently, and most of you know, most revered to me became Netanyahu in my life. And in the beginning, I had all types of fantastic questions and thoughts, many of them surrounding the book of Enoch, Jubilees, etc. And the way he dealt with me is that he never dismissed or discouraged any of my questions. He would carefully take my questions or concerns and address it using a biblical example. In doing so, he was gently guiding me back to the truth, while sometimes using my launching point of an extra biblical text to do so. This eventually led me to an understanding of the truth of scriptures and who Messiah was. And over time, as I begin to find Messiah and almost everything I saw, I begin to let go of those things that were not fruitful for my growth in him. What Yahudah is talking about here are those men who cannot or will not let go of their vain desires and their flawed understandings. These types of men are present at our feast. Men who have been given the truth, who know the truth, who have been called, possibly not chosen, and definitely not faithful. These are they that attempt and can lead many astray. And I have personally seen this with my own eyes. These spots at the feast. Yahudah says they are carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth. That means that what they once had some basic understanding of, even that dies. And are without fruit, twice dead, who will be plucked up by the roots. Think about that. The twice dead reference means they have been and profess to be born again. Perhaps they have been baptized in the way, but they have refused to let the old man die. We can know this because Yahudah is telling us they are present at the feast, murmuring, complaining, speaking great swelling words, but truly walking after their own lust. We should remember that these feasts, they are Yahuwah's feasts. These are the times that Yahuwah has appointed to meet with us. We are instructed to appear before him, not empty-handed, but also without blemish, without spots at the feast. We as a people, we as a nation, we as followers of the way, we will never reap the benefit that we were intended to reap by attending the feast until we learn to become a had in our following of the way and obedience in his truth. Not our truth, but his truth. We have to learn to put away our selfish wants and needs and become unified in him. It can't be about what Kepha wants, or what Pakad Yahu wants, or what Goshen group wants, or what Yah's remnant wants. It has to be unity in our understanding of what Yah wants, his purpose, his law or Torah, his truth. Our names, titles, and groups, well, they are evidence that we're not unified in him, nor in our understanding. Of course they are needed. Of course Goshen group is needed. Yah's remnant is needed. Netanyahu is needed. Pakad Yahu is needed. Netnel is needed. All of these things are needed, but I, like my elder, long for the day that there is no more Goshen group or Yah's remnant. And there is just those of us who live our lives like the example that Mashiach gave us. And him, Mashiach, leading his true assembly of saints. What Jude ends his apostle with is perfect for me to conclude with. So let us read verses 20 through 25, and let us take what the apostle says here to heart and apply it to our lives. It says, but ye, beloved, building up yourselves on your most Kodesh faith, praying in the Ruach HaKodesh. Keep yourselves in the ahab, or the love of Elohim, looking for the hesed of our Master Yahushua HaMashiach unto eternal life. And of some have compassion, making a difference. That means for some people that we come in contact with, we're going to have compassion. We're going to have to meet them where they're at. And we're going to have to be kind and gentle when we bring them along the way. Verse 23 says, and others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment spotted by the flesh. This means that for other people, we're going to have to be more forceful. We're going to have to grab them by the hand and bring them along the way. Now, unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of his esteem with exceeding joy, to the only wise Elohim, our Savior, be hin and majesty, dominion, and power, both now and ever. Amen. Todah Rabbah Mishpachah for letting me share with you, and I say Shabbat Shalom.